Robert Miller had buried his wife Margaret only 2 weeks earlier, but the grief didn't end at the cemetery gates. Their Ohio home, where they had shared 30 years of laughter, arguments, and quiet evenings, suddenly felt like a museum of ghosts. Every corner whispered her absence, her favorite chair by the window, the half-finished knitting project on the sofa. Even the kitchen where her recipes lingered like fading perfume. But before Robert could even learn how to live alone, his children arrived with an agenda. David, his ambitious son, and Karen, his practical yet sharp-tongued daughter, didn't come offering comfort. Instead, they came armed with suggestions. "Dad, the house is too big for you now. It's expensive to maintain. You'd be better off selling and moving into assisted living." Robert listened in silence, watching their eyes not on him, but on the walls and the furniture, calculating, measuring, already planning a future that excluded him. Even little Emily, his granddaughter, wasn't spared from their schemes. Names surfaced only when money was discussed, as though she were another ledger entry. In that moment, Robert realized his grief would not just be for Margaret. He was about to grieve the loss of something else, trust in the very children he had raised. The morning after their first visit, Robert Miller sat in his kitchen, with a cup of black coffee growing cold in his hands. He stared at the oak table he and Margaret had bought from a small furniture store 3 decades ago. That table had seen birthdays, Thanksgiving feasts, and long nights of homework with David and Karen. Now, it had become the place where his children outlined their plans for his future, plans that had nothing to do with his well-being. When they returned that afternoon, Robert noticed the way David carried himself. His son walked through the door like a man inspecting a property, not visiting a grieving father. David's eyes darted from the staircase to the dining room, then to the backyard, as if every inch of the house had already been appraised in his mind. Karen followed close behind, holding a manila folder, her tone brisk and businesslike. "Dad, we've done some research," she began, sliding the folder across the table. "The housing market is hot right now. You could get a great price for this place, enough to cover assisted living comfortably. It would take the pressure off you, and honestly, it would give us peace of mind too." Robert didn't open the folder. He didn't need to. He already knew what was inside: numbers, listings, maybe even the name of a realtor. Their urgency wasn't about him living safely. It was about the check they expected to cash once his house was sold. "Your mother loved this house," Robert said quietly. "She built her garden out back with her own hands. Every rosebush, every patch of lively she poured herself into this place." Karen gave a sympathetic smile, the kind people wear when they don't mean it. "We know, Dad, but things are different now. You can't keep up with it anymore." Robert studied their faces. There was no grief there, no shared ache for Margaret, only a restless hunger for control. Then David spoke, and his words cut deeper than Robert expected. "Dad, you're 70. Can't keep living here alone. It's not practical. We've already spoken to a buyer who's very interested. It would be a smooth process." There it was, the slip. They had gone further than research. They had already found someone, maybe even negotiated behind his back. Robert's heart tightened, but not from age. It was betrayal, pure and sharp. He remembered Margaret's voice, calm and steady, whenever the children pushed too hard. "Robert, let them talk. You don't have to agree. Just listen. And when the time comes, you'll know what to say." Taking a deep breath, Robert pushed the folder back across the table. "I appreciate your concern," he said evenly. "Oh. But this house isn't for sale. Not now, not ever." The air in the room shifted. David's jaw tightened. Karen tried. Again, softer this time, but her words carried the same agenda. "We're only trying to help. We don't want you to struggle." Robert leaned back in his chair, the sunlight from the window outlining the creases of his face. "I'm not struggling, and even if I were, it would be my choice how to handle it. This is my home. Your mother and I built our life here, and I intend to honor that." For a long moment, no one spoke. The only sound was the hum of the refrigerator. Robert knew this was just the beginning. They would return, with more arguments, more pressure, maybe even legal tricks. But something inside him had shifted. The grief was still there, heavy as ever, but it was now joined by a fire he hadn't felt in years, the fire to defend what Margaret had left behind. When David and Karen finally left, the silence felt heavier than before. Robert sat alone at the table, staring at the manila folder still resting there. He didn't need to open it. He already knew what it symbolized. Not care, not love, but a transaction. And in that moment, Robert promised himself that no matter what came next, his children would learn one truth. He was not a man to be managed, nor a resource to be harvested. He was their father, and this was his home. That night, Robert Miller barely slept. He replayed the conversation with his children over and over, every word cutting deeper than the last. Their eagerness to sell the house wasn't just unsettling, it was revealing. They had crossed a line, and now Robert knew he had to be ready. The following Sunday, David and Karen returned. This time Robert decided he would not sit quietly while they dictated his future. He prepared his coffee early, sat at the kitchen table with the morning paper spread out, and waited. When the door opened, David entered first, his voice carrying authority as though he were already in charge. "Dad, we need to finalize this. The market won't stay this strong forever. If we move quickly, you'll make a tidy profit." Karen followed with a softer tone, playing the mediator. "We've spoken to a realtor friend, Dad. He says we could close within 60 days. It would give you enough to live comfortably in assisted living for years. You wouldn't have to worry about bills anymore." Robert folded his paper and set it aside, studied his children, their hopeful expressions. Tinged with impatience, for a moment, he almost pitied them. "Almost, you both seem to forget something," Robert said calmly, his voice steady. "This house doesn't carry a mortgage. Your mother paid it off years ago." The silence that followed was deafening. Karen blinked in disbelief. David's face stiffened, his confident posture faltering. "What do you mean, paid off?" David asked, his tone sharp, almost accusatory. Robert leaned back in his chair, savoring the shift in power. 6 years ago, Margaret handled the last payment herself. She wanted it to be a surprise. She told me afterward, and we celebrated quietly, just the two of us. Since then, every dime I've spent on this place has been upkeep, nothing more. Karen's voice trembled. "You never told us?" "You never asked," Robert replied, "and I didn't think it mattered. Margaret and I built this home with our lives. Paying it off was her gift to me, to us. We wanted the house to be free and clear so it would never be a burden." David's jaw tightened, his frustration spilling into his words. "Do you realize how much money you're sitting on, Dad? You could cash out now, put it to better use. What's the point of holding on to this old place?" Robert's eyes narrowed, his grief hardening into resolve. "The point, son, is that this is my home. The value isn't in what it can be sold for, but in what it holds. Your mother's touch is in every corner. The garden, the living room, the bedroom we shared. It cannot be priced, and it cannot be replaced." For the first time, Robert saw something raw flicker in his children's eyes. Not compassion, but calculation. Their disappointment was not in his words, but in what they meant. No sale, no payout. Karen tried again, softer, almost pleading. "Dad, we're only looking out for you. You shouldn't have to worry about maintenance, about the stairs, about being alone here." Robert shook his head. "What worries me isn't the stairs. It's realizing that my own children see this house as a payday, not a legacy." The words hung heavy in the air, each syllable striking harder than he intended. But Robert did not take them back. They were true, and truth had its own weight. David stood abruptly, frustration radiating from him. "You're being stubborn, Dad. You're not thinking clearly. We're trying to help." Robert rose too, meeting his son eye to eye. "No, David, you're trying to control. There's a difference. I will not be managed." The standoff lingered, a chasm opening wider between father and children. Finally, David turned toward the door, muttering under his breath. Karen lingered for a moment, her eyes glassy, but she said nothing. Then she, too, left. Alone again, Robert exhaled slowly, his hands gripping the back of the chair. Margaret's absence was a wound that would never heal. But now it came with a sharper edge, the realization that his children were not allies in his grief. but adversaries in his future. And as he stood in the quiet of his home, Robert understood something vital. The mortgage being paid off wasn't just a relief. It was armor, a shield Margaret had unknowingly left him. And with that shield, he would fight. That evening, after David and Karen stormed out, Robert lingered in the living room, the weight of their disappointment still pressing on his chest. He walked slowly through the house, touching the furniture Margaret had chosen, pausing at the photos she had framed on the walls. A teachy detail whispered of her presence, her taste, her care, her love. And yet, Robert sensed she had left him more than memories. Margaret had always been thoughtful, deliberate. She had prepared for things he could never imagine, drawn to her study, a small room off the hallway. Opened the door. The air smelled faintly of lavender and paper, as if Margaret had only stepped away for a moment. Arranged, just as she kept it, with her fountain pen resting atop a blotter. Robert sat down, his fingers grazing the smooth wood. For the first time since her funeral, he let himself cry freely. When the tears finally eased, his hand brushed against the bottom drawer. Something inside felt heavier than it should. He pulled it open and found a leather-bound folder, worn at the edges. Tucked beneath old letters and stationery, it seemed out of place, as though it had been hidden on purpose. With trembling hands, Robert placed the folder on the desk and opened it. What he saw made his breath catch. First, bank statements, accounts he never knew Margaret had. Savings, investments, enough money to stand on their own. Then, a deed signed, sealed and notarized. His eyes scanned the words, property located in York County, Maine. A cabin, 2 acres, lakefront. Robert blinked, hardly believing. Margaret had purchased an entire property in her name, and he had never known. But that wasn't all. Among the papers lay an insurance policy, naming only their granddaughter, Emily, as the beneficiary. Margaret's handwriting had underlined the clause twice, as if to emphasize, for Emily's future. And Emily's alone, finally folded carefully inside, was a letter in Margaret's familiar cursive. Robert unfolded it slowly, his heart pounding. My dearest Robert, if you are reading this, it means I am no longer there to shield you. I know David and Karen. I know their hunger for control and the way they see the world through numbers and possessions. They will come after what you and I built together. They will dress it up as concern, but do not be fooled. That is why I bought the cabin in Maine. It is yours now, quietly, without their knowledge. Think of it as an escape plan, a safe place if the pressure grows unbearable. Protect it. Do not mention it. And above all, remember, you owe them nothing. You have given them your love, your years, and your guidance. What you keep now, you keep for yourself. Trust Linda, the caretaker. She has been loyal and knows the property well. Should you need help, Attorney Samuel Green in Portland will ensure your rights are protected. Be strong, my love. That you are. Wiser than they think and stronger than they realize. Always yours. Margaret. Robert set the letter down, his hands shaking. His grief mixed with astonishment, then with something sharper resolve. Margaret had seen the storm coming long before. She had left him not only memories, but weapons. Money, property, allies, and a plan. He leaned back in the chair, staring at the folder. For the first time since her death, he felt Margaret's presence, not as a hollow absence, but as a guiding force. She had reached across time to stand beside him in this moment. Robert whispered aloud, voice breaking but steady. Thank you, Margaret. You knew. You always knew. That night, Robert placed the folder back into the drawer, locking it carefully. He knew the battles with David and Karen were far from over, but he also knew he was no longer defenseless. Margaret had given him a hidden shield. With it, he would not only endure, he would outlast. The next morning, Robert Miller woke with a clarity he hadn't felt in weeks. Grief was still there, heavy as a stone on his chest, but now it was joined by something else: purpose. Margaret had left him more than memories. She had left him instructions, and Robert, a man who had spent his life honoring his promises, would not fail her now. He brewed his coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and opened the leather folder once more. His eyes lingered on the name written in Margaret's familiar hand. Linda, caretaker. He remembered faintly how Margaret once mentioned a woman she met on a trip to Maine years ago. Back then, Robert had assumed it was a passing acquaintance. Now, he realized Margaret had been laying bricks for a secret path all along. With a steadying breath, Robert dialed the number listed on a slip of paper tucked inside the folder. The phone rang twice before a warm voice answered. "Hello, this is Linda?" "Linda," Robert began cautiously. "My name is Robert Miller. I believe you knew my wife Margaret." There was a pause, then a soft intake of breath. "Mr. Miller, I was wondering when I might hear from you. I'm so sorry for your loss." Margaret was a remarkable woman. Robert's throat tightened. Yes, she was. She mentioned you well, more than mentioned. She trusted you. I found your name in her papers. Linda's voice grew firmer. "What?" "Then she must have wanted you to know the truth. Yeah, the cabin in Minette's. Yours now. I've been maintaining it, as Margaret asked." "Everything is in order." Robert closed his eyes, relief washing over him. This wasn't just a property. It was a lifeline. "Thank you, Linda. I'll be in touch again soon. For now, please keep things as they are." "Quietly, I understand," Linda said. "Your wife was clear about that. Discretion is everything." When the call ended, Robert sat in silence, the weight of secrecy pressing in. His children could never know about Linda, or the cabin, or the life Margaret had quietly secured for him. Next, he turned to the second name Margaret had left him, Attorney Samuel Green, Portland, Maine. Robert hesitated. Lawyers had always made him uneasy, but Margaret's voice seemed to whisper from the letter, "He will ensure your rights are protected." So, he called an assistant, answered first, then transferred him. A moment later, a calm baritone filled the line. "This is Samuel Green." "Mr. Green," Robert said, his voice steady but low. "My name is Robert Miller. My late wife, Margaret, was a client of yours." Green didn't miss a beat. "Yes, Mr. Miller, I've been expecting your call. Please accept my condolences. Your wife spoke of you often, and she left detailed instructions with my office." Robert's grip tightened on the phone. "She told me you'd know what to do." "That's correct," Green replied. Margaret ensured the cabin was titled solely in her name to prevent interference. Upon her passing, it transfers directly to you. I've already filed the necessary documentation. The property is secure and your ownership is unquestionable. If anyone, family or otherwise, attempts to challenge that, they'll be met with legal resistance immediately. For the first time in weeks, Robert felt a sense of safety. "So there's nothing David or Karen can do?" Green's tone sharpened. "Nothing legal, but I advise caution. From what Margaret shared, they may try pressure, manipulation, even intimidation. Don't give them information they can use. Don't mention the cabin." Robert exhaled slowly. "I won't. I understand." "Good," Green said. "If you need me, I'm only a phone call away." "And Mr. Miller, your wife was a wise woman. She saw things clearly. Trust her judgment." After the call, Robert set the phone down and leaned back in his chair. For the first time since Margaret's funeral, he didn't feel alone. He had Alice. One's unseen by his children, but strong nonetheless. That evening, Robert locked the folder back in the drawer. His house felt less like a tomb and more like a fortress. Margaret had given him tools, and he was beginning to use them. He wasn't ready to reveal his hand? Not yet. The battle with David and Karen was only beginning. But now, Robert had a secret weapon, Margaret's foresight, and with Linda watching over the cabin and Samuel Green guarding the law, Robert no longer felt like a grieving old man at his children's mercy. He felt like a man with options. The following week, Robert Miller began to move with a quiet determination that surprised even himself. He was still grieving, still waking in the night, reaching for Margaret only to find emptiness beside him. Now his grief was being reshaped into resolve. Margaret had trusted him with her plan, and he intended to honor it. One evening, Robert sat down at the same oak table where his children had once tried to dictate his future. This time, he brought a yellow legal pad and a pen. He drew 3 columns across the top. At the head of the first, He wrote in firm letters what they know. In the second, they don't know. And in the third, what I want them to think. He stared at the page, letting the silence of the house steady him. Then he began to write. In the first column, what they know, he listed the family home, his age, his pension, his grief. All the things his children could see and use against him. In the second column, what they don't know, he wrote the main cabin, Margaret's secret accounts, the life insurance for Emily, its connections to Linda and Attorney Green. That column grew longer with every word, and with each line Robert felt stronger. Finally, the third column. What I want them to think, that he was tired but manageable, grieving but unaware, cautious but not prepared. He knew the value of underestimation. Let David and Karen believe he was too sentimental, too slow, too weak to act. That illusion would be his shield. Asterisk, the exercise steadied him. It gave structure to the chaos. Margaret had always said, "Robert, write things down, it clears the fog." Now, the fog was lifting. From there, Robert began his quiet preparations. He rented a small P.O. box at the post office 2 towns over. The clerk, a kind woman with graying hair, asked if he wanted a short-term rental. Robert simply nodded, offering no explanation. Next, he reached out again to Linda. Their conversations grew warmer, filled with small reassurances and updates on the cabin. She described the lake in summer, the quiet mornings when the mist rolled. Over the water, the sound of loons calling at dusk. Robert found himself picturing it a place untouched by David's sharp words or Karen's calculating smiles. A place where Margaret's spirit seemed to linger, waiting for him. He also called Attorney Green once more. This time to arrange for duplicate sets of documents, one mailed to the P.O. box, another kept in his office. Belt and suspenders, Green said with a chuckle. Robert found himself smiling for the first time in weeks. Then, almost on impulse, Robert went online and purchased a one-way, fully refundable ticket to Portland, Maine. He didn't plan to use it yet, but the confirmation email printed and tucked into the folder gave him comfort. It was a tangible reminder that he had options, that he could walk away if the pressure became unbearable. At night, Robert organized the house. He created 3 piles in the garage: go, stay, travel. Old tools and furniture went into go. Precious items tied to Margaret, their wedding album. Her jewelry box, her handwritten recipes were labeled stay. And in the travel pile, he placed a small duffel bag with essentials: passport, cash, medication, and copies of key documents. He didn't plan to leave yet, but when the time came, he would be ready. Each quiet step, each hidden precaution, gave Robert something his children could never offer him: peace of mind. He was no longer a man cornered by grief and betrayal. He was a man quietly drawing the battle lines, using patience and preparation as his weapons. And though Margaret's chair in the living room remained empty, Robert felt her presence stronger than ever, guiding his hand, steadying his heart, reminding him that he was not alone. A week later, Robert Miller was sipping tea by the window when he saw David's SUV pull into the driveway. The tires crunched over gravel with a kind of purpose. That made Robert's chest tighten. Moments later, Karen stepped out of the passenger side, and behind them trailed a man in a gray suit carrying a briefcase. Robert didn't need an introduction. His children hadn't come for a visit. They had come with reinforcements. When the doorbell rang, Robert answered slowly, letting them see the calm in his face. David didn't wait for pleasantries. "Dad, this is Mr. Collins, our attorney. He's here to help us talk through your future." The lawyer extended a polite hand, but Robert only nodded and led them into the living room. Margaret's chair sat empty, a quiet witness to what was about to unfold. Karen began, her voice carefully measured. "Dad, we know you're grieving, and we don't want to overwhelm you. But we also can't ignore the reality. You're living alone in a house that's too large. It's too costly, and frankly unsafe for someone your age. That's why we asked Mr. Collins to join us today." The lawyer cleared his throat and spoke with a polished tone. "Mr. Miller, I've reviewed some options your children suggested: assisted living facilities, estate planning strategies, possible buyers for your property. All of these are designed to protect your best interests." Robert studied the man's face. He had the smooth confidence of someone used to closing deals, not comforting families. He wasn't there for Robert's best interests. He was there to package his. Children's ambition and legal language. David leaned forward. Dad, this isn't about control. It's about making sure you're taken care of. You can't maintain this house forever. For a long moment, Robert said nothing. He let the silence fill the room, heavy and uncomfortable. Then he spoke, his voice low but steady. I appreciate your concern, but let me be clear. This house is not for sale. Not now, not ever. The lawyer shifted in his chair. Mr. Miller, with all due respect, refusing to consider these options may put you at risk. Financially, medically, even legally. Your children only want to protect you. Robert straightened, his shoulders squaring, as if Margaret's strength had risen within him. I don't need protection from my own life. What I need is respect for my choices. This house, Margaret's garden, the memories in these walls, not a liability. It's my legacy. Karen tried again, her voice soft, almost pleading. Dad, we're not trying to take anything from you. Robert's eyes sharpened. Aren't you? You come here with a lawyer, armed with contracts, and buyers already lined up, speaking about my life as if I'm a piece of property to be managed. Let me tell you something. I am not a resource. I am your father, and I will not be dictated to. The words struck like a hammer, and the room fell silent. David's face flushed, anger simmering beneath the surface. The lawyer cleared his throat. Again, sensing the meeting had turned, finally Robert stood. This conversation is over. You're welcome to visit as my children, but not as my overseers. If you cannot respect that, then you can leave. For a moment no one moved, and David muttered, You're making a mistake, before storming out. Karen lingered, her eyes filled with something between guilt and defiance, but she too followed. The lawyer packed his briefcase in awkward silence, offering a stiff nod before slipping out the door. When the house was quiet again, Robert returned to the window. Outside, Margaret's roses swayed gently in the breeze, untouched by the storm that had just passed through the living room. He let out a slow breath, feeling both exhausted and unshakably firm. The battle lines had been drawn, and though he stood alone, Robert knew he was not without strength. Margaret's voice seemed to whisper through the garden outside. Stand tall, Robert. This is your fight to win. After the confrontation with David, Karen, and their lawyer, Robert, Miller knew one thing for certain. Waiting passively would only invite more attacks. His children were determined to treat him like an obstacle to be managed, and if he didn't act, they would only push harder. Margaret had trusted him to be strong. It was time to prove he could be. The next morning, Robert walked through the house with a yellow pad in hand. Room by room, he made notes what belonged to him and Margaret, and what had quietly collected over the years from his children. Old trophies of David's baseball days, boxes of Karen's college essays, even a rocking horse Emily had outgrown, but Karen insisted on storing just for now. All of it took up space in his home, and suddenly Robert realized those things weren't his responsibility anymore. He called a local moving company, the kind Margaret had used whenever she reorganized the house. The man on the phone asked what needed moving. Robert answered simply, just some boxes and furniture. Nothing complicated. By the weekend, 2 movers arrived with a truck. Robert directed them to the basement and attic, pointing out every item that belonged to David and Karen. Each box was labeled with their names, every scrap of their past carefully separated from his life. As the movers loaded the truck, Robert felt lighter, as though he were reclaiming space, not just in his house, but in his spirit. When the last box was sealed, Robert handed the movers 2 sets of instructions. This load goes to my son's address, and this one to my daughter's. Please deliver them separately, and include these notes. He had written them the night before in his steady, deliberate hand. For David, returning what belongs to you, in keeping what belongs to me. For Karen, I've cared for these long enough. Now they're yours again? No explanations. No anger, just a boundary drawn in ink. The movers nodded, and by afternoon the truck rolled away, carrying with it years of clutter and unspoken obligations. Robert stood on the porch watching it disappear down the street, a quiet satisfaction rising in his chest. That evening, his phone rang. David's number flashed across the screen. Robert let it go to voicemail. A minute later, Karen called. He ignored that too. When curiosity got the better of him, he pressed play. David's voice was sharp, almost panicked. "Dad, what is this? You can't just dump all this stuff on me. What are you trying to prove?" Karen's message came next, softer but edged, with frustration. "Dad, I don't understand. Why now? You didn't have to do this. It feels final." Robert deleted both messages without responding. He wasn't looking for a debate, was making a statement. Later, as he sat by Margaret's desk, he opened her folder again and tucked copies of the movers' receipts inside. Everything mattered. Now every record, every decision. He wasn't just defending himself from his children's pressure. He was building a wall of proof that he was capable, deliberate, and in control. The house felt different that night, tempted her, yes, but in the best way.
Ow.
Every corner seemed to breathe again, free of the shadows of boxes and forgotten belongings. For the first time in years, Robert felt the house was truly his, as he locked the front door and turned off the lights. Robert whispered into the quiet hall, "We're getting there, Margaret, step by step." He climbed the stairs slowly, the weight of age still on his body but not on his spirit. Margaret had given him strength through foresight. Now he was giving himself strength through action. The battle with his children wasn't over, but Robert had made it clear. His life, his home, and his choices were not theirs to claim. The boxes had barely landed on David's front porch before Robert knew a storm was brewing. He didn't have to wait long. 3 days later, late in the afternoon, a car screeched into Robert's driveway. Robert was trimming the roses Margaret had planted when he saw David slam the car door shut, his face flushed red, jaw tight as a coiled spring. "Dad," David barked, striding across the yard. "What the hell was that stunt you pulled?" Robert laid his clippers on the garden bench and straightened slowly, meeting his son's anger with a calm expression. "It wasn't a stunt, David. I returned what belongs to you." David's fists clenched at his sides. "Do you think you can just dump years of junk on me like that? You have any idea how disrespectful that is?" Robert's voice stayed even. "Disrespectful? No, son. What's disrespectful is treating your father like a business deal. You and Karen came here with a lawyer to sell the roof over my head before Margaret's flowers have even wilted. David is disrespect." The younger man's face darkened. "You're twisting this. We were trying to help. You're old, you're alone, and you can't handle this house forever. Selling it makes sense. But instead you go behind our backs, pull some dramatic gesture, and act like a victim." Robert took a step closer, his eyes steady. "I'm not a victim, David. I'm your father. I will not be bullied into giving up the life your mother and I built. If you want your things, they're yours. But my life, that stays with me." For a moment, father and son stood inches apart, the air between them heavy with unspoken history. David had inherited Robert's height, his stubborn jawline, even his tendency to dig in when challenged. But Robert carried something David didn't: decades of endurance, of choices made and burdens carried. David's voice broke through, loud and raw. "You're being selfish. Don't you get it? You're making this harder for everyone. We're family, Dad. We should be able to decide these things together." Robert let out a slow, deliberate breath. "Family doesn't mean control, David. Family means respect. If you can't respect my choices, then maybe it's time you stop pretending this is about me at all." The words landed like a blow. David's eyes flickered, not with understanding, but with fury. He turned away, pacing the length of the porch before spinning back. "You'll regret this," he muttered. "You'll regret pushing us away." Robert's reply was calm, almost quiet. "No, son. What I regret is realizing too late that you and your sister see this house as an asset, not a home. That you see me as a liability, not a father." The silence that followed was sharper than any shout. Finally, David threw his hands up, stormed back to his car, and roared out of the driveway. gravel spitting in his wake. Robert stood there, breathing slowly, the roses rustling in the summer wind. He didn't feel victorious. He didn't feel triumphant. He felt something deeper, solid, unshakable. For the first time, he had faced his son's fury without flinching, without bending. As the dust settled on the road, Robert whispered into the quiet air, "You were right, Margaret. They try to take everything, but I won't let them." He picked up the clippers again and returned to the roses. Life went on, and he still had work to do. The days after Margaret's funeral passed. Like a fog, Robert Miller kept moving through the house in Ohio they had shared for more than 30 years, but everything felt hollow. He still sat 2 places at the table out of habit, still reached for the second pillow at night. Grief came in waves, and Robert often let it wash over him in silence. But one afternoon, the quiet was broken. His son David and daughter Karen arrived. Together, their voices too bright, their smiles just a little too forced. They sat him down at the dining room table, Margaret's favorite place for family meals, and within minutes, Robert realized this wasn't a visit of comfort. "Dad," David began, tapping his fingers on the polished wood, "we've been thinking about your situation. This house is too big for you now. It's a lot of work, and it's expensive to keep up." Karen leaned in, her tone softer, but no less direct. "We just don't want you to struggle, Dad. Selling the house would free you. You could move somewhere easier, maybe even an assisted living place where you'd have company and care." Robert looked at their faces, earnest on the surface, but with eyes that flickered past him around the room. Measuring the space, calculating the value, their concern didn't feel like love, it felt like a transaction. He folded his hands, letting the silence stretch. "You've thought this through, have you?" David nodded quickly. "Yes, we've even spoken to a realtor. There's a buyer interested. You'd make good money, and we could handle the paperwork for you." Robert's chest tightened. Margaret's chair was empty at the end of the table, but he could almost hear her voice. "Be careful, Robert. They don't see what we see." The truth hit him hard in that moment. His children weren't just worried about his well-being. They were circling the house like hawks, eager to carve it up for themselves. "I see," Robert said finally, his voice calm but edged with steel. "You've already found a buyer before you asked me if I even wanted to sell." Karen's cheeks flushed. "We were only trying to help." "No, if you were trying to help, you'd ask me what I wanted. You'd sit here and remember that this house isn't just square footage. It's my home. It's where your mother and I lived, where we raised you, where every brick holds a memory. That's not something you just put on the market." David's jaw tightened, but Robert pressed on. "Hey, let me make one thing clear. I am not moving. I am not selling. This house stays right here, and so do I." The words fell into the silence like stones into water. David frowned. Karen looked down, and Robert knew the matter wasn't settled in their minds. But for the first time since Margaret's death, he felt something steady inside himself. A line had been drawn. Robert's story reminds us of something powerful. When grief leaves us vulnerable, even the people closest to us may try to take control. But love, memory, and dignity are not things to be signed away on a contract. They are worth protecting, even if it means standing alone. And maybe that's the lesson for all of us. You're never too old, never too broken, never too small to stand firm for what matters most. If this story touched your heart, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever had to protect something important when others didn't understand? Share your experience in the comments below. If you'd like more stories like this, full of family, resilience, and life's hard-earned lessons, please hit that subscribe button and join our community. Your voice matters here.